Every legend has a ghost. For Spencer Tracy, it was Louise Treadwell, the woman Hollywood tried to erase. While the world swooned over Tracy's decades-long affair with Katharine Hepburn, few remembered that he was, in fact. Louise wasn't glamorous, wasn't drawn into Hollywood's orbit, and didn't fit the role of a leading man's wife. She was plain, serious, and partially deaf, qualities the publicity department found deeply inconvenient. But in 1923, long before his fame, she stood by him through career failures, alcoholism, and financial struggles. When fame finally came, she was quietly replaced, not by another marriage, but by a myth. MGM's studio machine decided the world didn't need to see Louise Tracy. They erased her from press photos, excluded her from premieres, and rewrote Spencer's public image as a brooding bachelor with a private heart. The truth was more complicated. Louise spent her life championing education for deaf children, founding institutions that outlasted both their relationship and the illusion that surrounded it. She never complained publicly or sought recognition. Even at Tracy's funeral, many in attendance didn't know who she was. A publicist later admitted, "We weren't just selling Tracy's films, we were selling Spencer Tracy, the idea." A wife didn't fit that idea. Louise Treadwell became a casualty of image control, sacrificed on the altar of perception. Her story, more than any other, reveals the price of maintaining the Hollywood dream, the destruction of anyone who didn't match the fantasy. If old Hollywood loved beautiful faces, George C. Scott and Colleen Dewhurst were the living rebellion. He once joked that his own face looked like a clenched fist, and hers, critics said, carried the majesty of a thunderstorm and the grace of a tank. Together, they looked less like a couple and more like two forces of nature colliding. Scott was volcanic, a towering temper, and a voice that could rattle stage rafters. Dewhurst, tall and commanding, had a voice so deep it could silence a theater. When they met, it wasn't attraction in the traditional sense. It was recognition. Two artistic titans, too raw, too rough, too real for the Hollywood pantheon. They married in 1960, divorced in 1965, remarried in 1967, and divorced again 5 years later. But in between the chaos, they created something profoundly rare, a bond built on mutual respect for each other's artistry. On stage and off, they argued, inspired, and illuminated one another. They looked like they were carved from the same block of granite, with dynamite, one producer quipped. But unlike most celebrity couples, they never tried to soften their edges. They weren't there to polish each other's image. They were there to sharpen it. When asked about their tempestuous partnership, Dewhurst famously replied, "We loved each other. We loved acting, and we both hated pretty people." It wasn't bitterness, it was truth. In their worlds, substance mattered more than shine. In a Hollywood where appearances sold millions, George and Colleen proved that power could be magnetic, even when it wasn't photogenic. Their relationship burned bright, loud and unapologetically real. Two artists who refused to fit the frame. Peter Lorre never looked like a movie star. With his bulging eyes, soft round face, and strangely haunting voice, he made his career out of making audiences uneasy. Nobody did creepy quite like him. But even among Hollywood's rogues gallery, his love life stands out, because the woman he loved looked like she'd stepped straight out of one of his horror films. Celia Lovsky, an Austrian actress and Lorre's former drama teacher, was older, severe-looking, and utterly unforgettable. Her thin, angular face and commanding presence seemed built for Gothic portraits, not Hollywood premieres. One cruel columnist once said, she had the look of a hatchet that had witnessed a murder. Still, behind that striking exterior was the mind that made Lorre great. Long before Hollywood knew his name, Lovsky recognized his brilliance. She coached him, shaped his early performances, and effectively built the persona that made him famous. They weren't just lovers, they were artist and architect, actor and director of his own myth. Their marriage, built on intellect and discipline rather than image, was a rare reversal of Hollywood's usual formula. When addiction began to sink its claws into Lorre, Lovsky was the one who held him up, negotiating contracts, managing his finances, and protecting his legacy. She didn't just love him, She kept him alive. They looked like two gargoyles who found comfort in the same cathedral. One director joked, but for those who looked past appearances, theirs was one of the purest love stories in a business built on illusion. Celia Lovsky saw the talent the studios exploited and the fragility they ignored, and she devoted her life to preserving both. Even after their marriage ended, she continued advising him, quietly ensuring his troubled brilliance never faded completely. Their story wasn't glamorous, but it was deeply human, a love grounded in loyalty, art, and survival. The creature may have been famous, but his creator made him immortal. Anthony Quinn was the kind of man people described in primal terms: volcanic, fierce, larger than life. He wasn't just an actor, he was a force of nature. On screen, he devoured roles with a rough physicality that made him magnetic. Off-screen, women adored him, which is why Hollywood was stunned when he married someone who didn't fit the script. Catherine DeMille wasn't a classic Hollywood beauty. The daughter of director Cecil B. DeMille, she carried Hollywood royalty in her blood, but not its looks. Rumor had it that what she lacked in glamour, she made up for in pedigree. And that was exactly what Quinn wanted. For a struggling Mexican-Irish actor trying to claw his way out of poverty, marrying into the DeMille dynasty was the ultimate strategic move. Industry insiders whispered that the marriage wasn't about love, it was about leverage. One columnist dryly observed, "Anthony Quinn didn't marry up, he married in." At studio parties, the contrast between husband and wife was impossible to ignore. Quinn, radiating physical dominance and sexual energy, towered beside Catherine's reserved, almost chilly demeanor. Her appearance wasn't the problem, it was her presence. She carried herself like an heiress who knew the world owed her reverence, even if the mirror didn't agree. Their union was explosive behind closed doors. Friends recalled shouting matches that blurred the line between love and war. Quinn, never known for restraint, openly admitted later in life that his success owed much to her father's connections. Yet emotionally, the marriage burned itself out. Their story wasn't tragic, just transactional. It represented Hollywood at its most honest, a place where love could serve as a business merger, and beauty wasn't always the deciding currency. Catherine gave Quinn the connection he needed. Quinn gave her the excitement her privileged world lacked. As Hollywood evolved into the television age, their fiery marriage became a cautionary tale of ambition masquerading as romance, the most naked power grab in Tinseltown, sealed not with a kiss of passion, but a handshake of opportunity. That's a great point to pick up the narration. Right after Anthony Quinn's calculated Hollywood alliance, James Mason was the kind of man who didn't just enter a room, he drifted in like cigarette smoke, cool, measured, and impossible to ignore. With his dark eyes and velvet voice, he could have chosen any starlet in Hollywood's glittering galaxy. But when he married Pamela Auster, later known as Pamela Mason, the town nearly fainted. Pamela didn't look like the leading man's dream match. She wasn't camera pretty even by gentle standards, and under Hollywood's merciless lens, she became a gossip columnist's favorite punchline. Her angular features and brisk British manner made her stand out, and not in the way poor agents wanted. "Is this a practical joke?" one studio head allegedly barked after seeing her photograph for the first time. But Hollywood soon learned something. Pamela didn't care. She was smart, dangerously smart, and in a city powered by vanity that made her a threat, she wrote sharp-witted scripts, hosted brutal dinner parties where she eviscerated producers between sips of sherry, and didn't bother playing the quiet, supportive wife. While other actors' spouses perfected smiles and silence, Pamela spoke her mind, often slicing egos sharper than her eyeliner. One producer once quipped, "She looks like someone built her from spare parts left over after Madame Tussauds sale." But after 5 minutes of talking, you forget your name out of fear. James Mason, that smooth British heartthrob, adored her mind. During events, he'd fetch her a drink or hand her appetizers while she held court with legendary disdain. It was unheard of. A leading man deferring to his wife in 1950s Hollywood. Their power dynamic was the reverse. Avert every expectation, and for over 2 decades it worked. Their marriage lasted from 1941 until 1964, remarkable by industry standards. and it produced 2 children and countless golden-era tales of verbal combat. She was fierce, unfiltered, and utterly uninterested in pretending to be pretty. As one director later said, James married the only woman who scared him more than he scared anyone else. When asked about her unconventional life, Pamela once said, "I wasn't born to sit in the background of someone else's close-up." In an industry built on faces, she proved that intellect could outshine beauty, even under 1,000 studio lights. Wallace Beery had one of those faces that could only exist in black and white film. Rugged, squashed, permanently irritated. On screen, he was lovable in a rough-around-the-edges way. Off-screen, he was infamous for being Hollywood's nastiest man. Even Louis B. Mayer, the tyrant of MGM, once admitted Beery was the most hated man in town. Yet somehow, this Hollywood brute married Rita Gilman, a woman so plain that industry wags joked she made oatmeal look exciting. Their 1924 marriage baffled everyone. Beery wasn't conventionally handsome, but stars like him usually chose wives who fit the glamorous bill. Rita didn't. She wasn't famous, didn't come from money, and had no ambition to join Hollywood's high society. One gossip columnist sneered, "The star of The Champ married a woman who couldn't even get cast as an extra." Publicists struggled to frame the relationship for magazines. At premieres, Rita looked perpetually out of place, a librarian among chorus girls, shrinking beside the red carpets she clearly despised. But perhaps that mismatch was exactly what Beery wanted. If the rumors were true, he treated almost everyone around him cruelly, but Gilman stayed, possibly because she was the one person who didn't care about his fame. For all the mockery, their union lasted far longer than most of the era's glamorous studio marriages. Theirs was a love story Hollywood couldn't photograph, and that might be why it lasted as long as it did. If Borgnine and Rancourt were Hollywood's down-to-earth pair, then Charles Laughton and Elsa Lanchester were its true theatrical oddities. To the public, they were a living cartoon, a couple so visually mismatched that no amount of studio lighting could disguise their peculiarity. But behind the strange exterior was one of old Hollywood's most functional and deeply human partnerships. Laughton, the genius behind characters like Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, didn't need much help from makeup to look unconventional. His wide eyes, jowly face, and rough demeanor made him the go-to actor for roles that required both ugliness and soul. Elsa Lanchester, meanwhile, forever immortalized as the electrified bride of Frankenstein, was no conventional beauty herself. With her angular figure, wild expression, and signature lightning-streaked hair, she seemed born for eccentric roles. And off-camera, she embraced that identity fully. They were royalty, one Hollywood insider once said, but not for their looks. They looked like before and after pictures of an experiment that went wrong. Yet the truth of their marriage was far from a tabloid joke. Their union was more of an understanding, a quiet arrangement that gave both of them something they needed. Laughton was a closeted homosexual in an industry where such a revelation would have destroyed his career. Lanchester, fiercely independent but misunderstood, found in him companionship, safety, and endless creative inspiration. Theirs wasn't a marriage of passion, but of protection, a pact between two artists navigating an unforgiving system. Publicists, realizing they couldn't sell beauty, sold brilliance instead. They leaned into their eccentric reputations, promoting them as theatrical geniuses, creative souls who defied ordinary life. To everyone's surprise, the strategy worked. They became icons precisely because they refused to conform. Their marriage lasted more than 3 decades, from 1929 until Laughton's death in 19... It was, in every sense, one of Hollywood's strangest successes. After his death, Elsa summed it up best in one perfectly dry remark: "Charles and I had the perfect marriage. No sex, no argument." It was Hollywood's most unconventional love story. 2 outsiders building a shared fortress of understanding in an industry built on illusion. What made Ernest Borgnine and Donna Rancourt's relationship particularly fascinating wasn't just its longevity. It was Hollywood's reaction. Usually when a star married someone too plain for the poster, the studios scrambled to fix it. New wardrobe, new haircuts, perhaps even a discreet modeling. But in Donna's case, there was no such rescue mission. The entire industry seemed to shrug. One executive at MGM even joked, They make perfect sense together, like two potatoes falling in love. It was a cruelly comic line, but it captured Hollywood's uncomfortable amusement. Borgnine himself seemed unbothered. Maybe because his own face defied movie star expectations, he had no interest in pretending. Instead, their very ordinariness became their strength. At a time when the entire industry was obsessed with appearance, Ernest and Donna lived quietly, privately, happily. Decades later, when journalists asked the secret of their marriage, Borgnine simply smiled and said, "Maybe we stopped worrying about what we looked like to anyone else." In a world that worshipped glamour, they found peace in normalcy, and that might have been the most radical act of all. Before Lauren Bacall turned him into Hollywood's suavest romantic hero, Humphrey Bogart lived a completely different story, one that looked more like a headline from a crime blotter than a love story. Mayo Methot, a stage actress with a volcanic temper, wasn't the kind of woman Warner Brothers wanted paraded around under their brightest lights. She wasn't the studio's idea of feminine perfection, and worse, she was famously unpredictable. Insiders said when Bogart married her, he also married a temper that could clear an entire cocktail party. Their brawls were legendary across Los Angeles. Hotel walls, glass tables, even a few reporters bore witness to their screaming matches. Rumor has it, one fight ended with Bogart sporting a knife wound he claimed came from a shaving accident. Studio publicists scrambled to excuse her absences from premieres, sending lies to gossip magazines about illness or film preparation. Insiders called them the battling Bogarts, but behind the drama, people saw something stranger. One of the toughest men in Hollywood terrified of his own wife. Only when he met 19-year-old Lauren Bacall on the set of To Have and Have Not did the cycle finally break. When news of their affair spread, studios reportedly celebrated. To them, it was less a scandal and more a face-saving miracle. One executive even joked, "Finally, Bogart looks like a leading man again." From Bogart's battles to Tracy's invisible wife, these 10 marriages strip away Hollywood's glow to reveal the machinery underneath, a system that demanded beauty, even when it destroyed truth. Some of these unions were forged in ambition, others in defiance, and a few in pure, unscripted love. Yet all exposed the same truth. Hollywood's obsession with perfection was never about people. It was about the picture. In an age of flawless stars and polished lies, it took remarkable courage to be real. And maybe that's why these misfit marriages, strange, uneven, and all too human, still captivate us. Because in a world built on illusions, authenticity is the only real scandal.